Welcome back to another episode of Speaking Tongues. I'm here today with Wanyā. How are you today, Wanyā?
Good, good. How are you? Good to see
Um,
you.
it's good to see you too, and it's good to be seen. I'm so
Yes,
happy to have you on the show today to have this conversation. And this is something I have to tell you. I've been wanting to have this conversation for since I started the show. So I'm so excited we're doing this. It's going to be a little different than the way we usually, conduct episodes here. I'm so excited. I like
yes.
to start each episode with the same question, and that is what is your first language and which languages have you learned to speak?
Well, my first language is English, and I've learned to sign ASL. And also, I'm currently learning French, but I wouldn't consider it my third language yet. Um, I'm better at understanding, but still, it can be a struggle when you're not hanging around the people who speak the language.
It's hard. I'm also improving my French right now, and
Hmm.
it's a conscious effort to stay immersed and try to, practice with the right people and
Right.
yeah.
Shout out to Duolingo. So I'm really happy that they are a thing because without them, I wouldn't really have much exposure unless I did my own research online. But it's nice to have something that you can easily go to and practice daily. So
Mhm.
shout out to them.
Shout out. What made you interested in French specifically?
Well, growing up, we only in my school district we only had Spanish, and then we got to high school, we only had 2 years of Latin because the other 2 years were cut. And I wasn't, yeah, budgets, but I wasn't really interested in Latin. So I just took Spanish again, and I seemed to be like getting like good, trying to understand Spanish more, and it felt like I was on my way to fluency. But then I stopped, and I got to college, and I was interested in sign language. But then I was also interested in French because it was something different, another different spoken language that I haven't tried yet. And I wish my high school had it, so I took a few years in college. But then it got to be overwhelming, and I wanted to pick it
Mm.
up again afterwards.
Well, I'm glad you're coming back to it. It's exciting.
Yeah, yeah, it is exciting. I feel like it's been over 10 years since I first started, but it kind of feels like I should be more along my learning progress. But hey, that's part of it, right?
It
Sometimes you
is.
stop and then you go back and all that stuff.
So ASL, how did you come to ASL? How did ASL come into your life? And tell us about some of that.
Okay, so I have to start at the beginning because that's a great place to start, I suppose. Um, when I was in third grade, there was an after school program where you could learn sign. And our teacher had a deaf brother. And so she was leading the class, and there was another teacher too. I'm not really sure what her story was, but so we were learning to sign, like, the finger spell, like the letters, and then some numbers and some signs. And at the end of the year, I believe we did, we signed The World's Greatest by R. Kelly. And it was really nice. It was cool. Like a neat way to display our new learned skill. And then after that, really, it was a long gap. I believe it was my 11th grade year after my 11th grade year that summer. I went to this program. It was called Boy State. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. Um, so I'm from Jersey, and so they had this program called Boy State, where it was a week long, and it was a program where you can learn about how to get involved with politics. And honestly, I was selected for it, but I didn't really know too much about it, and I just used that as a way of networking. Basically, it was like nice to be, out of my town, and it was in Rider University, so guys from all over the state will come, and they also had a similar one for girls state, in a different
Oh.
university. Yeah, so it was interesting. So it's a week long and during the summer, and I was still practicing like once in a while my finger spelling, like after all this time since third grade. And then there was a deaf guy there, who I didn't realize he was deaf at first, but then there was interpreters. So I was like, oh, I wonder who they're here for. And then I met the person who was deaf, and when I went up to him, I was trying to figure out how was I going to communicate with him, because, like, I mean, finger spelling each letter would
Mm.
be a lot, you know. So,
Right, right.
and then I noticed that he was using his phone, so we just ended up, whenever like we interacted with him, we just used our phone, like in the notes, section, and we would write notes back and forth to communicate. Um, so that was another part, of me like being exposed to ASL. And then fast forward, when I graduated from high school in 2011, and then I went to RIT, the Rochester Institute of Technology, for school for my undergrad. And at that time, I wasn't going for interpreting. I was going for software engineering, because I thought I really wanted to be a software engineer. um, but long story short, I was going to one of my classes and I passed him, the same guy from back in
Oh,
Boise
wow.
State. Yeah, and back then I didn't really know too much about like deaf history, and RIT and Gallaudet, and CSUN are popular schools that deaf and hard of hearing people go to, because they have big populations of deaf and hard of hearing people. Not to say that those are the only schools that they go to, because you can go anywhere, But RIT is a popular school that deaf and hard of hearing people will go to, and I
Okay.
didn't know that at that time. And it was kind of like a culture shock slash, like, I was just shocked in general to see like this guy from my former life, at at my new school. And then after that, there was interpreters in my classes, and I was just really interested in this interpreting, and slash ASL thing. What's that all about? Like, more. I wanted to learn it more in depth. Um, I took ASL one the next quarter, and I also talked to one of my interpreters that were in my history class, and she told me about the field, and I was just really interested, and I applied to the interpreting program, and the rest is history. So
That's
that's
so
my long
exciting.
story.
Yeah, that's really exciting. Wow, I didn't know that about RIT either. Like, you hear Institute of Technology and you just think it's engineering and science and math and
Exactly,
okay.
because
That
RET, one of the four, yeah, it is. One of the nine colleges, rather, is NTID, the National Technical Institute for the Deaf, and that's where interpreters learn to interpret. That's also, where most of the ASL classes were held. So yeah, a lot of people don't know that, but that's they were trying to figure out where to put the National Technical Institute for the Deaf, but there was a lot of deaf people living here already, for Kodak, because that's another thing that Rochester's known for. And so they're like, let's put it here. There's a whole story with that, but yeah. So RIT is the home of NTID.
So tell me about some of the ways that and I say this because what I know of ASL,
Mm-hmm.
and I think what a lot of people who aren't um who aren't around people who are deaf or don't intimately know a deaf person, we
Mm-hmm.
probably have some ideas of what ASL does for the community and how it's used. Um but tell us some ways that you're able to work with the community and um support the community as an interpreter,
Mm-hmm.
not only with the language, but I guess with the community as well. Some things that, that this language is used for that maybe an outsider wouldn't necessarily see right away.
Yeah, I think um, learning a language in general, we know that when you learn a language, you're not just learning the language, you're learning a culture, you're learning what people experience, it's an added experience as a person who is deaf or hard of hearing. When you're learning a spoken language to communicate with hearing people, maybe you recognize the language, like, oh, that's French, oh, that's Italian, oh, that's German, but you just can't communicate with them because you don't know that language, but you may know like a few words
Mm.
because you've learned them as like, as a person growing up who's hearing um, different languages. But for a deaf person, that's not necessarily the case. Deafness is a spectrum. So like a deaf person may not be profoundly deaf who can't hear anything, but they may. So it's a range. So when you're learning the language, you got to learn also the oppression that goes along with uh, that deaf and hard of hearing people have experienced, and and knowing that you can't uh, necessarily you can't just learn a language and and that's it. You know what I mean? The people are involved, and you gotta know the people and what they've gone through. I guess if that's answering
Hmm.
your question.
Yeah, I think it seems to me like taking on um or being an interpreter of ASL, you it seems to me like you don't have the opportunity to separate yourself from the culture and from the history and from what
Mhm.
it means for someone who's deaf. And like you said, deafness is a spectrum, but what it
Mhm.
means and how that accessibility can completely change somebody's life. And
Yeah.
having that proximity to that, I imagine, means understanding the community a lot, in like you said, in a way that you can know a few words in another language and you can maybe get by, um
Mhm.
but that's so different. It's
Yeah. It is, and I think like one of the things that I remember from the program that teachers were always trying to instill in us is like, listen, like especially with being in a school that 10% of the population is deaf or hard of hearing, you got to take advantage of hanging out with deaf and hard of hearing friends, because learning in the classroom can only go so far. You don't want to be an interpreter who like is a punch in, punch out type of person who's like, I'm here, show up for my work, I did it, and now I'm done. But when you're not hanging out with the community, it's like you're missing that key aspect. You don't know what's going on. Like there's so much that goes on. And I like to say that everything can be prep. You know what I mean? Like if you are hanging out with your friend and a new slang term shows up, and then when you go to work and it shows up there, you're like you know how to interpret it because you've seen it and how your friends use the language. um so it's just important that you're not just like, hey, I'm here and I'm just going to interpret, and then like I'm not going to be involved with the community because that's the whole point.
right, right.
Yeah.
um can we learn some basics of ASL?
Yes, I will also. I will say this. You should always probably learn from a deaf or hard of hearing person if they're available to you. There's a lot of resources online. You can just a short Google away and make sure that you're learning from credible people. But for the basics, absolutely.
So what are some of the first things that you're learning in ASL? And maybe you're in your classes, or you know you're being exposed to ASL for the first time. Like, maybe what are some of the first things that a teacher would say to you, or would show you?
Mhm. Yeah, so you would learn the structure of ASL, and ASL is subject, verb, object for the most part. And sometimes, too, time is important too. So, like, that could be in the beginning, and sometimes they have it at the end as well. And then you would also learn the 5 parameters of ASL, and that's basically just like how it describes the signs and how the signer interacts with them, and how it behaves with the signer's space. So, for example, the 5 are hand shape, palm orientation, movement, location, and expression slash non-manual movements. And I will explain them all. But
Okay.
so the hand shape is like how the sign actually looks. Like, for example, like C or a D, like that's different different shape. Um, you can do like for school, like how it looks is the hand shape. The palm orientation is which way is it facing? Like, is it this way, or this way, something like that. The movement is how the sign moves, and location. For example, the sign for mom is right here on the chin, but the sign for dad is the same hand shape, but it's a different location. It's on your forehead.
Oh,
Um, mhm. And then the non-manual signals are, for example, like how with ASL, it's not just the signs, it's also your mouth movements, or like how you're expressing it, like your like in spoken language, it's your tone. Um, for example, is it blue or is it like bright blue? See how my face, like my eyebrows went up and my eyes expression changed? Or is it like dark blue? You know what I mean?
ooh, okay.
Um, so that's ASL, and those are the five parameters. So like things like that you will learn off the bat. Mhm.
That was going to be the next thing I asked you. Like, how much do facial expressions play a role in what you're
Oh,
learning?
absolutely.
Yeah.
100%. It's part of the language. So
Right.
you could say something like light blue, but that's not like ASL. That's like more Englishy, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And some people prefer that. So that's another big thing of interpreting. You have to know what your consumer is, what their preference is for sure. Because some people find more Englishy, and some people find more ASL. They're all good, but you just got to know which one your consumer prefers.
What's the difference when you're saying Englishy or more ASL? Like, what's
So I should say, like, follows more of an English grammar
Oh,
versus ASL grammar. Hmm.
okay. Okay.
Hmm.
Oh, very interesting. I would not have known that.
I know and sometimes it can be a lot, but like that's kind of part of our job. Like you have to meet your consumers where they are, and then go from there for clear communication.
Hmm. Yeah.
Hmm.
And it is interpretation. So
Yeah.
yeah, I get it because that's what you do when you interpret. Like you're you're the one who's
Hmm.
conveying the tone and the emotions and things that go along with communication. Okay,
Exactly.
that is amazing. I noticed that you said that you want to learn always from a deaf person
Hmm.
when you're learning ASL. What are some of and I'm going to take that as a rule, as a principle of learning ASL, American Sign Language, which I did not say once. I just
Uh,
went right into ASL, but I should.
I don't know if I said it once either. Yes, ASL is American Sign Language.
I should have made that distinction earlier, but
I guess I should have too, but
it's okay.
here we
It's
are.
okay.
We're used to saying the acronym. You just
Yeah.
think everybody should know, right? But not everyone knows.
Right. What are some of the principles of interpreting for the deaf community? What are some of the like I'm saying rules, and I know what I
Hmm.
mean, but I guess I don't mean it so rigidly. I just mean like, you know, there are things you have to adhere to. I guess
Right.
what are some of the other things?
I would say, well, first, when interpreting, we are interpreting for both hearing and the deaf person. A lot of people think, we're here for the deaf person only, but no, like you're also the consumer because you don't know the language as well. Um, talk about hearing people. And so we are interpreters for both. It's like I said before, understanding where the deaf client is and like how they sign is important. So usually the interpreter will arrive early try to get their bearings and try to figure out exactly what the consumer needs in this specific moment. What is the reason why you're interpreting? And while you get that information, obviously you would have some information beforehand. But when you're talking with the consumer, you are then also getting to see their language. So you can adjust, like if, oh, this person seems to be signing more English like or more ASL like, or, like somewhere in the middle. You can kind of see that while you're also preparing yourself for the job. Interpreting in general is translating the source language, which is the language that the person is signing or speaking, and then culturally interpreting it into ASL or whatever your target language is. But the key point is doing that like with a short amount of time and culturally appropriate, because I think we get into this a little bit later, but the difference between actually just communicating and interpreting is huge, because communicating is your own words, but you want to make sure that when you're interpreting whatever the person is saying or signing, you want to also say that in another person's language, the target language, accurately and how they would say it. You don't have to say word for word, you know what I mean? So if you know another language, that's great, but you wouldn't just say what that person said in that other language exactly how it said, because it may not be culturally appropriate. Maybe they don't say it that way. You got to figure out how the phrases they say it and say it with a short amount of time. So it's your brain is doing a lot. So like sometimes when you see an interpreter, and I was naive too, because when I first started out, I was like, oh, they're just saying what they said, but in sign language, and oh, this doesn't seem like it's too hard, but a lot of brain power, a lot of like, that's why you have to still be engaged with the culture in the community, and knowing how people say certain things, because it may not be how that the person in the source language is saying it, but you just have to convey it in a succinct way that how the receiver is whatever their language is. Yeah.
I never would have thought about that, how it really matters that you go and become familiar with the person that you're interpreting for, and just
Yeah.
kind of understand like what their personality is like, because and as you're saying it, I'm like, man, if there's someone who's like really like animated, like I imagine you have to interpret in an animated
Hmm.
way. But if the person is like more serious,
Yeah.
like stern, like you have to adjust for that too. So that's
Uh-huh.
kind of like, and I guess that's the thing with, interpretation everywhere, and just something that I just personally never thought about. Like,
Hmm.
if the person is yelling, you probably have to raise your voice. If the person is like whispering, you have to,
Oh my
you have
goodness.
to convey that. How does that work in ASL?
Yes.
Like, how do you
I'm so happy you mentioned that, because that's called dynamic equivalence. And you have to do that because, oh, and so I would struggle with this, and sometimes I do too, because like if a person is, I don't normally like yell, not like that type of person, but you gotta kind of channel that person.
Mm,
You don't have to be so extra with it. You don't have to go overboard. Like if someone is yelling and you go like more than that and like doing the most, like you don't have to do that, but you gotta meet them where they are. If that person's upset, like you have to convey that. You're conveying a message. And so you're not, if someone's saying, no, I don't like that, like get that away from me, you're not gonna you're not gonna interpret that and be like, oh, I'm sorry, I don't really like that. Do you mind no, that man is pissed off. Like you gotta be pissed off too. You know what I mean? So you have to channel whatever that person, or if they're serious, if something really serious, you have to show that. So I think it could be a challenge for a person if you're not necessarily like um, used to doing that. You know what I mean? Because like I certainly wasn't like, oh, that person, he's mad, but like I'm not mad. But it's important to know too. It's like I'm not the one who's mad. I'm the interpreter. So like they say, don't shoot the messenger.
mm.
It's
That's
true.
Yeah, that seems like it's part of it. Like, you're the first interpreter that I've had on this show. So this
Oh
talking about
wow.
interpretation period, I know that I know that it's, we're talking about American Sign Language, but I'm also generalizing because I don't truly understand like you said, the mental power that goes into interpretation.
Well,
Um,
right. Yeah. And it's a demand too on yourself. And like we learned in school, like there's different demands, that we can control, some that we can't control. And all of that is part of who we are. We're still people. But it will have like an impact on the work that we do. So what we try to do is to manage those controls. For example, like if you're having a bad day, um, maybe is it so bad that you can't work?
mm,
If that's a possibility, then hopefully you can get someone to switch you out, or you can hopefully you get someone that will replace you if it's that bad. But if it's not that bad and you can manage it, then it's up to your discretion. But you try not to have it impact your work, obviously. But like I said, if it's too bad, then you need to figure out how to get yourself out of there and get a replacement for you.
yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Um, this is really fascinating. This is so fascinating. And like I said, I've spoken to translators before, and
Hmm.
people who translate the written word.
Hmm.
And for a long time I really inter what's the word? Mixed up translation and
Yeah.
interpretation, and they are very different. They are
Hmm.
different, period. Um
Timing is the difference, because with translation, you have so much time, like you maybe are translating like a text from one language to another, and you have time on your hands. But when you're interpreting, usually you are interpreting in the moment, and so that's really the difference. You know what I mean? And you are the person relaying that message. Whereas with translation, you might have one person looking over something, and then like another person another day, and like things like that. But as an interpreter, you're relaying that message right now, like during a meeting, during school, or whatever.
how much prep do you get? I mean, if do you get like if someone's making a speech, let's say, do you get a copy of that speech so that you can kind of work through and you know I mean, is it like 30 minutes? Do you have like 24 hours? Like
This is a great question, because a lot of interpreters will, if they watch this, they're going to be like, oh boy, because it depends really, that we would like to get it as much as advanced as possible. Some things we just get like maybe 5 minutes before, and you gotta kind of go with it. Try to do your own prep that you can do about, like, let's say if you're going to interpret for the president, like you would do your own research, like see what he normally uh, talks about, what this subject's going to be about, like, that type of thing on your own. But for specifics, you may not get the speech until like maybe an hour beforehand, and then you're like last minute trying to like dive into it. So on a good day, we get it like maybe like a week in advance. That would be great.
okay,
Uh,
okay.
2 weeks, a month in advance. Like, please, please. Because prepping is your best friend. You know what I
Mm,
mean? Like when you prepare for something, you feel more comfortable, and you don't have to worry about certain things other than the message itself,
mm.
and you're able to rock it. But sometimes you got to wing it.
What do you do as a professional? Maybe not you, but maybe what's a common thing to do if let's say you get something an hour and 90 minutes before you have to,
Hmm.
talk to the press, and there's a word you don't
Oh
know or
boy.
there's a term that you don't know. What's a
Hmm.
typical workaround for something like that?
So usually with interpretation, like the good thing about interpretation, it's like, so you don't have to do word order. You're not and so worried about like the specific words often. Sometimes you are, because like maybe it's an important word that people need to know. But if it's a concept, we are relaying concepts. So you just relay that concept instead of that specific word. That's where prep comes in. And like, if like, for example, a speech ahead of time, and you're like, oh, I don't know that word or that concept, you can look it up and relay it without maybe even using the word at all.
Mm-hmm.
So other workarounds too is like just finger spelling the word. That's not always the best approach because let's just say like if you don't know that word in English, how are you supposed to relay that word in the language that you're trying to interpret for? You know, so I mean that's not necessarily always the best case scenario, but it also is another way of providing access to that term. So I would say you can do that as well as a workaround. But your best case scenario is not worrying about the word itself, but relying on like conveying the concept.
Mm,
Mm-hmm.
okay.
Because that's what interpretation really is.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Are there people who interpret like specific things? Like are there like science interpreters? Are there arts interpreters or musical like people who specialize in ASL interpretation?
Yeah, there is. I mean, whatever you're naturally inclined on, maybe like you're really good at math, or maybe you're really good at science. There are interpreters at RIT that work there full time for RIT, um, who are really good at like let's say like science or math, and they work for that team, that core team at the department. And so like a lot of their assignments would be like interpreting classes that have math or science or maybe computer science and stuff like that. Yeah.
I love that. I love
So you don't
that.
necessarily need to be like, you don't necessarily need to go for an additional training. There are other like specializations, like for healthcare, like you can go to get a degree and specifically in that. But like if you know like a lot of math or you know like a lot of like computer science terms and stuff like that, or you really like it, then you can like, just pick up classes and interpret for those specifically, and you know that'll be a great benefit, really.
Oh my God.
Mm-hmm.
That's so cool. It's really so
It is
cool.
fascinating.
It's
It
really
helps out too.
fascinating. Yeah, I
It helps
bet.
with the interpretation process because like let's say if you go into computer science class and you don't know any of those terms, that in itself is another language. So it's like if you don't know that, like again going back to what we were saying before, if you don't know, how are you supposed to interpret? So hopefully you have someone that does know and who could teach you.
Yeah. And I feel like I hope that someone listening isn't like, oh, this girl's so dumb. Like she like what is she really thinking? But
Oh my gosh.
I'm really just curious and like
No.
trying to like this is amazing.
Hmm. Yeah.
I'm enjoying our conversation so far.
Oh, I love it. I could talk about it forever, but you know, I don't.
um so we've seen, kind of going off of what I was saying about trust and things like that, like
Hmm.
we've seen in recent years like people really messing
Oh
up.
boy.
People,
Yeah.
I mean, I we saw what happened at Madiba Nelson Mandela's funeral with
Yeah.
someone went off script, and something else recently happened in New York City with the mayor, and just somebody was
Hmm.
just out there. I don't know what they were doing, but they were out there doing something, and
Fake signs.
yeah, they were fake signing and so disrespectful,
Hmm.
super disrespectful. But I'd love to know like what goes into the process of choosing a trusted interpreter,
Interpreter. Yeah.
and someone that is not going to make a spectacle of themselves and take away from what's happening.
Hmm. So you know what? It's interesting because like there's a lot of different agencies out here, and like for example, for the Nelson Mandela funeral, it's really unfortunate to have someone who means a lot to a lot of people, and that's like we call like a high profile interpreting. When you're interpreting for something like that, it needs to be extreme, like vetted. You know what I mean? Like you need to have a great interpreter for those things. So the process, I don't know for each like event, you could say they usually have an agency who has that contract. And for example, the agencies that I contract through, they had a screening process that they use to hire or to onboard interpreters. because they're not our employers. I'm a freelancer, and agencies aren't our employers. We work with them and through them. So so they usually have a onboarding process where they screen you, they test your skills, and then after that they deem you qualified or not qualified, rather, and then you can pick up work through them. And so I don't know exactly how uh, that interpreter or the other ones got through. They probably didn't even have a vetting process. They probably just say, "Hey, you know sign," and like, the person's like, "Hey, I know sign," or just lying, and they just have them up there. And it goes to awareness too, because like a lot of people don't know about the process. They don't know about uh, deaf and hard of hearing people in general and the culture. So they're like, "Hey, you know sign? Please come on up." And maybe that's not the best person
Mm.
at all.
Yeah, because I would imagine if you don't have a deaf person on your staff, how and you need somebody right away, like you're just gonna
You're trusting people, and that's
right.
where the trust comes in. And like maybe the person who was organizing Nelson Mandela's funeral, they just wanted someone to have access, and they were just hoping and praying that, you know. But that's not good enough. You gotta be working with the community, and you gotta see, is this correct? Like, you need to ask these questions. But it was probably a last minute thing, unfortunately, and they just trusted the wrong people.
Mm.
Hmm.
Oh dear. High,
Unfortunately.
unfortunately, high profile, and I think it's just like to like if it was the local news, I don't think that you know. I mean, obviously, it is disrespectful, but I think like if it was the
Hmm.
local news, I think people would have just said, "What the heck?" But like
Yeah.
to add that onto a legacy like Nelson Mandela's was just like
Hmm.
it was disrespectful not only to the deaf community but disrespectful also to his legacy and his family and saying their final goodbyes and um
Yeah. But the thing is too, like, even local stuff, it can be anything. Like, you need to have someone that is skilled, because it's like the deaf person really suffers. It's like, I don't care if you're talking about the funeral of Nelson Mandela, or if you're talking about the weather for tomorrow. Like, I should be able to know what's going on. You know what I mean? In my language, it's disrespectful all around. And exactly, it really does disrespect all of us, because it's like, this is the standard that we have. Like, we don't even vet our people. We
yeah.
just hire anybody. We don't care. Is that what you're saying? So it's awful.
It is I'm glad we're talking about this because there's there and I said this before or I said this earlier, but there is so much respect and trust that comes into this as well. and
Hmm.
and and I hope that people are aware of that, and if they're not, I hope they're aware of it through our conversation now, like just
Oh yeah, yeah,
how
absolutely.
you know you did talk to me, we talked offline before this, but you talked to me about showing respect and honoring our deaf community. What are
Hmm.
some of the ways in which you've seen people taking advantage and profiting off of the community? And how do you think we can be mindful of inclusive practices and engage with the deaf community respectfully?
I like I said before, learning from deaf and hard of hearing people. I'm going to probably emphasize throughout this whole podcast today, just because it is so crucial. When you are learning the language, you should learn from people who that's their language. You should learn from the people who use it and who throughout their whole lives who are native. Now, does that mean that some hearing people are trustworthy? Yeah, sure. And you can learn if you needed to. Not saying that you should like just disregard all hearing people. Not saying that, of course, but we got to start with having respect, like we were talking about earlier. The people who use the language, there are things where like people learn, uh, like baby signs, they call it, like little signs that babies learn, and hearing babies learn. Um, is so cute, and like a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, like look, they're learning the sign. Meanwhile, like back in the 1800s when they wouldn't allow like deaf and hard of hearing people to sign, it doesn't make sense. And so like now we're praising uh like hearing parents teach hearing babies, but where was all that for deaf people who literally that's their language are being barred from even learning their language? It doesn't make sense. Um, so definitely learning for the language from the community, I could say is a great way to honor the community first and foremost, and just like being like mindful of like, cause as me as an interpreter, literally I learned the language from the community and I am interpreting, yes, and it's my job, but realizing and being mindful, like this is how I am earning my living. Like the community taught me. So honoring them, you know, and like I said, like being engaged with the community, you need to. Because it's like it feels like a diss, right? How are you gonna come in here and learn my language, take my language, and then leave and just get paid off of my language, and you're not even trying to like hang out or like learn more about us or be engaged with us. I feel like it's a big fu, you know, to the community
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
sure.
I agree. I
Hmm.
agree with you. There's so much. Like I
So
know
many things, so
there's
many
just
things.
there's so much. There's so much and like I said, I'm big on that. I'm big on respect. I'm big on community
Me
and
too.
like I never want to offend anybody. So I think it's always helpful to like pay attention to the people who, like you said, it's their language, the people who need it,
Yeah.
the people who use it. And um so exciting. I want to learn ASL now. You're gonna have to.
Oh yeah. I have to hook you up with some resources for sure because things like that, it's just like you know, and I get it. Like a lot of people say, like you want to learn, but then actually taking those next steps of actually doing it is a whole different process with any language, obviously.
Mm, mm,
But I think it's so important to at least first having those resources and then like going from there because a lot of times too, like you know, if you want to learn, like I was saying for French, like thank God for Duolingo, but like I mean, honestly, it would be really nice to actually live in the country, speak the language to people who speak it. But if anything, I'm glad that I at least have a resource where I can at least start to learn, you know.
mm.
Um,
Yeah.
now, when will Duolingo have sign languages? I don't know, but that would be kind of nice.
That would be
But
amazing. Talking about how the language evolves or how, you
hmm
language does evolve. Um
hmm
every language evolves. And I imagine that ASL does along with it. And I'm actually thinking of a very specific thing I saw recently. Um I saw a woman interpreting a Megan Thee Stallion song at a concert
Oh yeah.
and she was outstanding. I mean, I don't know like what she was signing, but
Hmm.
she was performing.
She looked like she was on fire.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
I mean, and this goes back to what we were talking about like with you have to mirror the energy of the person that you're interpreting for
Yes.
because she was mirroring that stallion energy and right. She was
I
she
don't know
was
if I could do that.
she was great, but as we know, Megan's lyrics are we know what
Explicit.
explicit, that's the word, explicit. And I think, but not only that, but just thinking like with music or with slang and popular words and how things like that,
Yep.
like how does ASL interpretation like evolve along with it? um
Right.
yeah.
I mean, it's just like how we make up things like you know any type of slang like no cap stuff like that is the same exact process for sign language and with the deaf users. You know what I mean? And deaf and hard of hearing users of the language, slang happens naturally with all languages, and so that's the part of being in tune with the culture and being a part of the community. If you're not hanging out, you may not know how to sign that specific new slang or maybe it hasn't been invented yet. Like maybe people haven't really used it, so that's another thing too. But that's where that prep also comes in, because in order to really keep up, you need to be knowing Megan Thee Stallion inside and out, like her lyrics inside and out, and you need to be hanging with the community, see how they sign. All of that comes into play, because please do not assign me to a concert like literally a day before. There's no way I'm doing that. That's just impossible. I mean, like, put me up there if you want, but it's not going to be good. I wouldn't accept it. You know what I mean?
So now, is there slang in ASL?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
There's so much. I was thinking, because I was prepping for this, but I was going to use like just like a phrase people use is like um, train gone. I don't know if that's specifically like slang, I wouldn't say, but like a phrase that I've come across a lot is like, it basically means like, oh, you missed it. Sorry, like the train's gone. Like, you missed it. You had to be there, type of thing. Um, Even though like when I was learning, I was there. I wasn't comprehending certain things, and that's part of like being in the community. They would tease you because like you didn't understand it. Sorry, the train's gone. Like, you missed it. Maybe you gotta hang out some more with us, and you'll understand like what we're talking about. And it could be frustrating sometimes. You're like, dang, like I just was trying to understand, but it's all part of it too. Like
Mm-hmm.
you're learning. You're not gonna get everything, and but they're like, too bad. Better luck next time.
I it makes sense that there would be, slang or maybe even shortened words or like abbreviated words and things like that. And oh
Yeah,
my God, so much to
it's like everything
know.
everything you could think of for from your language. Oftentimes can be is the same thing with another language, especially with ASL or other sign languages out there.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So much to know. So
Indeed.
much to know. So much to know. What about, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this. We're going to have a separate conversation about this, but um talking about maybe accents, dialects, and
Yes.
or the how ASL changes from coast to coast. Um, does that become a factor?
Oh yeah.
We're gonna talk about Black ASL. We're definitely gonna
I'm
talk
so
about
excited.
Black ASL. And, for people listening, there's gonna be a second conversation solely dedicated to Black ASL,
Yes.
Black American Sign Language. Sorry. Um, but for now, just talking about like accents or regional and dialects. We speak differently. We speak English differently from New York to California to Hawaii to Texas
Absolutely.
to Chicago.
Hmm.
Does ASL change with that? How does it change with that? And how does it change within the Black community?
Yeah, yeah. So that's great. Um, so I'll start off with I'm excited to have that second segment with Dr. Hill. And he has a lot of work and experience with BASL, Black American Sign Language. And I thought it would be great to have him on because he experiences it. And he had a linguistic project that he did with uh, Carolyn McCaxill. I think that's her last name. Don't quote me on that, but those two, fantastic work. But so I'm so excited about that. Uh, but anyways, going back to like ASL and how it's diverse depending on where you are, it's just like the American South. Like when you go to the American South, you can hear the twang, how people talk. It's so different than the North. It's the same thing with ASL. Um, the signs that people use, maybe the vocabulary is a little bit different. Ultimately, when we go to the South, we can still understand for the most part because they're still speaking English. Likewise with ASL, you go somewhere else in the country. I remember, so I was a, a counselor for deaf camp. Um, for deaf and hard of hearing and CODA kids. CODA is a child of a deaf adult, so they are hearing, but their parents our desk.
Okay.
So
Okay.
yeah, so that was in North Carolina, and one thing that I recognized off the bat is like when we were going through the days of the week, um, this is the sign for Sunday, where I'm from, and a lot of places in the U.S. But like regionally in North Carolina, this was the sign for Sunday, and so I was like, "What is that?" And so, so that's a
Mm.
little example. So like little things like vocabulary. I think so. This is a sign for purple. It's a P and out here, and I believe it was in Michigan. It was this, but this is also the sign for light and like to turn on the light. Like this is the sign for light, but out there that's the sign for purple, and I don't know what the sign for light out there is, but so like there's certain things that are a little bit different, maybe difference in vocabulary, but for the most part, obviously we're still communicating in ASL, so you'll understand them. But there are slight regional dialects, you could say.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
yeah, and related to Black ASL, um, that came from segregated schools, and not supposed to mingle with white deaf people, and so as language does, it evolves, and since segregation lasted, quite a while here, language also evolved with it. Um, for the most part, you can still understand, but there's still some differences, you know what I mean? And Dr. Hill will get into that for sure. But it's so fascinating because in every little thing you can think about in spoken language literally does happen in ASL, with regional accents, with segregation, and how language is still transformed. It's
Hmm.
amazing.
It's really fascinating. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
even think about it until, I asked the question about Megan the Stallion. Megan the Stallion.
Yes.
Um, but but yeah, like I think of how, particularly in music and like hip hop music, like how the style of hip hop is different in the South than it is in Chicago and LA and New York and
Mm-hmm.
Atlanta. Like, maybe the language is different, or maybe like like you said, like they use different words, and as you said, like they use different words in the South. I thought like, how we will say like, oh, we're gonna do something, and like someone from the South may say, I'm not gonna generalize, but someone from the South may say like they're fixing to do
Uh
something.
huh.
So
Uh
like
huh.
that's so interesting. Oh my
Yep.
god.
The same thing applies for ASL, and it is incredible. Like when I was learning this for the first time too, like I'm just like, what? Like this is just mind blowing. Like you don't even think about it initially. I don't think it's like a hearing person.
Yeah. Oh my
Hmm.
goodness. I love this.
Me too.
So I didn't ask you about, and again, just for people listening, we are going to be talking to Dr. Hill, so that will most likely be a YouTube episode only. So
Hmm.
um look forward to it. It's coming. It's
I
coming.
can't
It's coming.
wait. So excited.
One thing I didn't ask you about, and this is going to tie into one of my last questions, is handedness in ASL. Are which hands are we using? Are we using both hands
Oh.
equally?
Oh. Okay.
Does it are there some signs that you only use one hand and like the other hand signifies different things? Like, can we
Hmm.
talk about that? And it ties into the question I want to ask you about sign languages spoken in other countries, like in the
Yes.
UK or let's keep it narrow to English speaking countries, but like the
Yeah.
UK
Sure.
or South Africa, Australia, etc.,
Hmm.
Canada, even. Where
Yeah.
does handedness fall into
Okay.
signing?
I so yeah so two-handed structures are usually used for all languages, but so I the point I want to make is too, like for finger spelling, in American Sign Language you only need one hand for all the alphabet. You know what I mean? But for the United Kingdom, for Australia, And I'm not sure about South Africa or other English speaking. We could talk about Canada in a second, but those two, the UK and Australia, the UK uses BSL, not to be confused with BASL. That's Black American Sign Language. BSL is British Sign Language. And Australian Sign Language, they use Auslan. That's what it's called. And but both of their alphabet, they use two hands. So when they're finger spelling, they use both hands. Far as with Canada, the Anglo part of Canada uses ASL, and the francophone part uses LSQ, which is basically Quebec Sign Language, uh, Langue des Québécois. I think that's how you will say it. So that is, I mean, some similarities, but it's different. Um, and yeah, it's just interesting because you would think initially you would probably think, oh, they speak English, so why wouldn't their sign be the same? But there's history that goes along with that. um, so Thomas Hopkins Gallaudet, he was a minister, and I believe he moved to Connecticut or was visiting Hartford, Connecticut, and there was a deaf girl named Alice Coswell. He noticed she wasn't really interacting with the children, and he found out that she was deaf, and he realized that she was really smart, but just couldn't communicate. So he wanted to figure out how to communicate with her. And then he found out, like, in Europe, they have these schools for the deaf where there was none in America at the time. So he went over there to the UK and they denied him access. So they were like, nah, this is our language, get out of here, no Americans.
Mm.
So he went to France and they were willing. And once he was over there, I believe he was learning some of their sign language, which was La Langue des Signes Française, LSF. And there was an assistant at the school that he was at. His name was Laurent Clerc, I think that's how you would say it. And the two of them actually went back to the States and founded the first deaf school in Hartford, Connecticut, which is the American School for the Deaf. And so there's a mixture between French Sign Language, home signs that deaf people would sign at home because they were separated, you know what I mean, all throughout the country. They had their own home signs that they would use to communicate with family. And there was a thriving signing community in Martha's Vineyard in Massachusetts, where there were some deaf people and some hearing people, but they all like would sign. And there was a mixture between the three of them made ASL eventually. And so there's close ties to French Sign Language. But you may not understand completely, but it's close. But language evolves, like we know. And so the old French Sign Language and the old ASL look more closer than they are now.
Wow.
Fantastic. And so that also sparked another reason why I should have learned French and possibly French Sign Language down the line. But, that's, it's a whole other language and a whole other conversation. So.
As you've and please come back when you do
Oh
speak
my
French
gosh.
sign language. We'll do the episode in French.
Oh my gosh, that'd be so fun.
As you have been exposed to the sign languages of other countries, um again, I will get carried away if I don't narrow it down to English speaking countries, but let's say the UK, for example, BSL. um
Mhm,
we can understand, English speakers can understand British English, and there are a few words that we don't
mhm,
have, and vice versa.
mhm.
Is that a similar, like,
No, it's completely different language in entirety. You know what I mean?
what?
Yeah, so that's the thing too. A lot of people think that, well, for the English speaking ones or in general, they think it's a universal thing, but every country has their own language, sign language. Just like people were separated by land back in the day, we didn't have internet, obviously. So they had their own communities far apart from each other. so they developed their own languages, and it's just different. Remember, I was saying that Thomas Gaudet tried to go out there and try to learn from the British first, and they denied him. So maybe our sign languages would have been closer and like similar, but with time, everything changes. But it wasn't the case at all because he didn't even let us. They didn't let us learn from them. Is what
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying. So,
Mm-hmm.
but even French sign language, like for the most part, you probably could get by here and there, but like still, it's a completely different language. So you're not gonna know it unless you learn the language.
Do we need, is it a situation where you need an interpreter for an interpreter? Like,
Yes, if you would like to know what they're saying,
wow.
it's
Okay, so
fascinating.
you could theoretically be someone who can sign ASL and BSL if
Yep,
okay.
whatever languages are that you're able to learn, and you can just like spoken languages, you can learn sign languages as well.
I get so mad at myself when I'm like asking these questions. I'm like, this is so
Oh my
obvious,
god,
dummy. Like, like,
don't
why
get
are you
mad because
asking
like
these stupid questions?
those are great questions. They are great questions because people don't know. You know what I mean? Like if you don't know, you don't know. And it's great that we're having this conversation because there's a lot of people who probably think the same or just don't know.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Thank you so much for this conversation. I want to ask you before
Ah,
my heart is
it's
so
been so
full.
great.
I've had so much fun talking with you, and you're so much fun to
Ah,
talk with.
likewise, it's always great to just talk with you, and of course about languages. It's so
Yeah.
fun.
Is there anything else that maybe we didn't get to mention that you want to bring up or talk about?
Have I mentioned you should probably learn from deaf or hard of hearing people?
Let's emphasize that. Let's
Let's
emphasize.
emphasize.
Um,
Yes, and of course, there's great hearing people out there who teach and it's fantastic. But just always want to prioritize that. But other than that, I think that's really all I had, and I'm just so grateful to be able to be here to talk about it.
Thank you so much for making the time and for the work that you do. Your work is important, and
Thank you.
thank you for doing it, and thank you for sharing the ins and outs of interpretation. And there's I could go on asking you so many questions. I
And I
want
could answer.
to. um, I do like to end each episode with the same question, and you tell me if you can answer this or not. If you can't, then it's fine,
Okay.
but this is my typical last question. Do you have
Mhm.
any jokes, popular sayings, tongue twisters, cool slang words, idioms, words of wisdom, or words of advice in ASL to share?
Well, along with learning from deaf and hard of hearing people, I would just say again to interact with the community, and like I said before, the train gone situation. That I mean, you will learn that deaf and hard of hearing people are usually blunt. You know what I mean? Like they are to the point. Oftentimes I think that stems from like not having a lot of communication, a lot of access to communication. So they need to get to the point, because who knows when they will have, access again. But I just want you to not be discouraged if because a lot of hearing people aren't blunt, and feel like we, especially Americans, are not to the point, and we definitely go around things that are law. We definitely tend to beat around the bush, and I want to let people know that it's a cultural adjustment. I definitely sometimes could be put off. I'm like, what? Oh my goodness, you're talking about you are constipated, like you know what I mean, like, and I'm like, what's happening here? Because we don't usually do that so openly, but I don't want that to be a deterrent from people learning the language. But again, when you learn the language, you learn a culture, and it's all beautiful. So
Yeah. Wanye, thank you so much again for this
thank you so much
conversation.
for having me.
Really quickly, after you've been talking, after you've been signing with someone for a long time and you've been having a wonderful conversation, and you're about to go your separate ways. How would you sign goodbye? What would be the best way to sign goodbye? Don't think about it too hard, just the first that comes to your mind.
Bye bye. I would just wave. It's so funny because there's a formal sign, I guess, for hello, on your head, and then like you basically like this gesture where you point out your hand towards the person. But like that's not, you just would wave hi and bye. You know what I mean? There's no like, I guess, uh, official way that you need to say it. And yeah, I don't want to overcomplicate it because that's literally what I do, what everyone does.
What everyone does. Well, Wanyā,
Good to see you.
thank you so much, and I'll be talking to you soon.
I can't wait. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.